The audio recording began with silence, then a faint whispering that grew louder. When I played it back later, I realized the whispers were saying my name, though no one had been in the archives with me when I made the recording. "You won't believe what happened next. Watch until the end." The rain pounded against the windows of the New York Public Library's Special Collections Room as I, Dr. Elliot Graham, pored over recently unsealed medical archives from the early 20th century. As a medical historian specializing in forgotten psychiatric institutions, I'd been granted exclusive access to these documents, records of asylums and clinics that had operated in New York between 1900 and 1930. One slim folder caught my attention, sealed with wax bearing an unusual insignia, a circular design with a pine tree at its center, surrounded by what appeared to be sound waves. The label read, Whispering Pines Institute, 1920-1922, restricted. The archivist, Ms. Palmer, noticed my interest. "That one wasn't supposed to be included," she said. "It's still under restriction." "What's Whispering Pines?" I asked. "I've researched every psychiatric institution in New York from that era, but I've never heard of it." It was unofficial, more a private clinic than a proper hospital. The records were transferred to us when St. Mary's Hospital closed in 1978. "Who restricted them?" I pressed. "The Archdiocese of New York," she said quietly. "Unusual for medical records, I know." She glanced around the empty room. "My predecessor mentioned that Whispering Pines was controversial. The church became involved after several patients reported unusual experiences during treatment. The clinic closed suddenly in 1922. After signing a confidentiality agreement, I broke the wax seal. Inside were perhaps 50 pages of documents. The first was a typed letter on letterhead that read, "The Whispering Pines Institute for Advanced Therapeutic Modalities," dated January 15th, 1920, to the Board of Trustees. "Our facility at 117 Blackwood Avenue is now fully equipped. The sound-dampening modifications to the therapy rooms have been completed, and the electrical apparatus for recording neural oscillations has been installed. Our first cohort of 7 patients has been selected from among those deemed treatment-resistant by conventional facilities. Each exhibits the specific brainwave patterns I identified, the alpha wave anomalies that suggest receptivity to our methods. The nature of our work, particularly the application of sub-auditory frequency modulation as a means of accessing deeper consciousness, must remain proprietary until we have conclusive results. I remain convinced that what traditional medicine labels as delusion may in fact be glimpses of perceptual realities beyond our current scientific framework." Dr. Albert Merrick, Director. Accompanying the letter was a photograph of a severe-looking man with round wire-rimmed glasses and a bald head. He wore a white physician's coat and stood beside a strange apparatus that resembled a radio transmitter connected to a modified chair. The next pages contained patient intake forms with personal details redacted, followed by Dr. Merrick's treatment notes. Patient number 3, March 4th, 1920. Subject responded exceptionally well to the 7.83 Hz resonance therapy. After 17 minutes, pupillary dilation was observed, followed by a trance-like state. When questioned, patient reported hearing voices from the other side of the wall that were speaking about future events. Most intriguing was the patient's ability to accurately describe the contents of a sealed envelope on my desk, an experimental control I had implemented without informing my staff. "Will increase resonance duration in tomorrow's session." I felt a chill. The date, 1920, predated formal research into brainwave frequencies by over a decade. The first human EEG wouldn't be recorded until 1924. Next was a handwritten letter from Sister Mary Catherine to Bishop William Reynolds, dated October 1920. Your Excellency, 3 former patients of Whispering Pines Institute have been admitted to our care, all exhibiting similar symptoms. Periods of catatonia, alternating with frenzied speech about voices beyond the veil and seeing through time. Most concerning are the religious implications. One patient claims that heaven and hell are the same place, viewed from different frequencies of perception. Given the proximity of this institute to church property and the spiritual danger it may pose, I respectfully request your intervention. Sister Mary Catherine, I found myself deeply intrigued. The next item was a report dated April 1921 by Merrick himself. Progress report. 6-month outcomes of our initial 7 patients. 5 have now progressed to stage 3 perceptual attunement, demonstrating remarkable capabilities. 1. Consensual perception of non-physical stimuli. 2. Non-local awareness, accurate descriptions of distant events. 3. Temporal anomalies, precognitive statements, later confirmed. 4. Shared dreamscapes, patients reporting interactions during sleep. Most significant is patient number 1, who can now induce the receptive state in others without the apparatus. Through touch alone, he transferred a perceptual experience to a nurse. The church's representative visits next week. I have prepared a modified demonstration. I checked my watch, surprised to find that 2 hours had passed. As I packed up, I noticed the temperature had dropped considerably, my breath visible in the air. The lights flickered, and I felt a peculiar pressure in my ears. "We're closing, Dr. Graham," called Mrs. Palmer, making me jump. That night in my hotel, I reviewed my notes and listened to my audio recorder. The recording began normally with my voice summarizing findings. But in the background, barely audible at first but growing louder, was a strange whispering I hadn't noticed while in the archive. I turned up the volume and froze as I realized what I was hearing, my own name, whispered repeatedly by a voice I didn't recognize. Elliot Graham. And then, "We see you've found us. We've been waiting." I dropped the recorder. There had been no one else in that room. I was certain of it, yet somehow I wasn't alone anymore. And you, have you ever heard whispers when you thought you were alone? Let us know in the comments below. I barely slept that night, the whispered voice from my recording replaying in my mind. By morning, I'd nearly convinced myself it was simply audio contamination. Perhaps another visitor's voice had somehow been picked up by my sensitive digital recorder. But as I prepared to return to the archives, I noticed something odd in the bathroom mirror. For a split second, I thought I saw someone standing behind me, a bald man with wire-rimmed glasses. When I turned, no one was there. At the library, Ms. Palmer had the Whispering Pines documents waiting. "You look tired, Dr. Graham," she observed. "These old cases can be disturbing." "Just academic fascination," I assured her, though my hands trembled slightly as I opened the folder. Today, I focused on a section labeled Treatment Protocols. The first page outlined the basics of Merrick's methodology. The harmonic resonator operates on the principle that human consciousness can be altered through specific audio frequencies, particularly those below normal hearing threshold, 1 to 20 Hz. These infrasonic waves, when precisely calibrated, appear to modify brainwave patterns in susceptible individuals. Initial exposure creates a loosening of perceptual boundaries. Continued application leads to what I term consciousness expansion, a state in which patients report awareness of stimuli beyond conventional sensory limitations. Critical to the process is the use of the Blackwood frequency, 3.17 Hz, discovered during my experiments at Vienna General. This specific resonance appears to function as a carrier wave for conscious experience, allowing perception to extend beyond the physical limitations of the sensory organs. The document included detailed diagrams of Merrick's apparatus, a modified radio transmitter connected to a specialized chair with metal conductors positioned at the patient's temples and base of spine. Most disturbing was a small notation at the bottom. Sustained exposure may produce permanent perceptual changes. Exercise caution. The next document was a transcript of a session with patient number 1, dated March 1920. Merrick, describe what you're experiencing now. Patient, the walls, they're becoming transparent. I can see the next room. Nurse Wilson is arranging folders on the shelf. Merrick, to assistant, verify. Assistant leaves room, returns 2 minutes later. Assistant, confirmed. Nurse Wilson was organizing patient files exactly as described. Merrick, what else do you perceive? Patient, there are presences, not people. They're like vibrations with awareness. They're curious about us, about this machine. They're drawn to its frequency. Merrick, can you communicate with these presences? Patient, they don't use words. They use impressions, images, feelings. They're showing me events, things that haven't happened yet. Merrick, such as patient, a building falling, crowds in the streets. Numbers. 1929. Something significant happens then. Merrick, excited, remarkable. The stock market crash won't occur for 9 more years. I stared at the page in disbelief. This transcript, supposedly from 1920, referenced the 1929 market crash. Was this an elaborate hoax? But if so, why restrict the documents for decades? I continued reading. The next item was a memo from Merrick to his staff, dated December 1920. Recent developments necessitate new security protocols. Patient 204 demonstrated unexpected abilities yesterday, accessing restricted files in my office without leaving her room. When questioned, she stated, I didn't need to go there. I sent my mind instead. More concerning, patient number 1 appears to have influenced Nurse Matthews without the resonator. After brief physical contact, she reported experiencing his exact visual hallucinations for several hours. All staff must now wear the protective pendants I've provided. The silver alloy disrupts the Blackwood frequency, preventing unintended consciousness transference. The Church's increasing interest in our work is problematic. Their representative has requested another visit next week. Prepare patient number 5 for demonstration. His abilities are impressive, but less theologically challenging. I found myself touching my neck, almost wishing I had one of those protective pendants. The pressure in my ears had returned, subtle but unmistakable. Next was a report about the Church's investigation, authored by Father Thomas Reed, dated February 1921. I've concluded my second observation of Dr. Merrick's facility. While his scientific explanations involve technical jargon about frequencies and neural oscillations, I cannot deny the troubling reality of what I witnessed. The patient demonstrated abilities that defy natural explanation. When blindfolded, he accurately described objects in my pocket brought specifically for this test. More disturbingly, he recited passages from my private journal, word for word, despite having no access to it. Dr. Merrick insists these are merely manifestations of expanded consciousness through his frequency treatments. However, the theological implications are profound. If human perception can be artificially extended beyond normal limitations, what becomes of our understanding of divine revelation? Most concerning was the patient's statement that the veil between worlds has always been thinner than the Church realizes. This suggests a dangerous blurring of boundaries between the natural and supernatural realms. I recommend immediate episcopal intervention. The next document was a letter from Bishop Reynolds to Cardinal Hayes in New York, marked confidential. Your Eminence, the situation at Whispering Pines requires urgent attention. What began as apparent medical quackery has developed disturbing spiritual dimensions. Father Reed's investigation confirms that Dr. Merrick's treatments are producing effects beyond scientific explanation. Patients are exhibiting abilities traditionally associated with mystical or prophetic experiences, yet achieved through mechanical means rather than divine grace. This represents a profound theological challenge. More concerning are reports that these altered perceptions can be transferred from person to person like contagion. If such capabilities spread beyond the controlled environment of the clinic, the implications for religious authority and doctrine could be severe. I respectfully request ecclesiastical authority to intervene directly. As I read, the archive room seemed to grow dimmer despite the bright afternoon sun outside. The pressure in my ears intensified, and I began to hear what sounded like distant whispers, too faint to make out words, but unmistakably human voices speaking in hushed, urgent tones. I glanced around, but Miss Palmer was nowhere to be seen. I was alone in the archive room, or at least physically alone. The final document in today's section was a patient testimony, handwritten on Whispering Pines stationery. I need to record what I've seen before they take me off the treatments. Dr. Merrick doesn't understand what he's discovered. He thinks he's found a way to expand human perception, but it's more than that. The frequencies don't create these abilities. They reveal what's always been there. We're not supposed to see them, but they've always been watching us. In the corners of rooms, in reflections, in the static between radio stations. The resonator just attunes our minds to their frequency, and once you've been attuned, you can't go back to not seeing. The church is right to be afraid, not because it's evil, but because it's true. There are layers to reality they've never acknowledged, beings they've misclassified or denied. I've seen them, I've spoken with them, and now they've noticed me noticing them. If you're reading this, you're already involved. They know you now. They'll find you through these words, through the resonant frequency embedded in this ink. I'm sorry, I truly am. The page was signed simply, Patient Number 7, dated April 1921. As I set the document down, the whispers suddenly stopped. The pressure in my ears released with a pop, and the room's lighting returned to normal. But the silence felt weighted, expectant, as if something was waiting for me to respond. My rational mind insisted this was simply the power of suggestion. Reading about these experiences was triggering a kind of sympathetic response, a psychological mirroring of the described phenomena. Yet when I raised my eyes to the glass-fronted bookcase across the room, I couldn't explain away what I saw reflected there. Standing directly behind me was the bald man with wire-rimmed glasses from Merrick's photograph. His lips were moving, though I could hear nothing. I spun around. The space behind me was empty. When I looked back at the reflection, he was gone, but something had changed. I could feel it, a subtle shift in perception, as if the world had been slightly retuned, like a radio finding a clearer signal. The documents before me seemed to pulse with a faint rhythm that matched my heartbeat. I needed fresh air. Outside the library, I sat on a bench trying to calm my racing thoughts. My phone chimed with a text message from an unknown number. The frequency is spreading. You've been attuned. Don't fight it, Dr. Graham. We've been waiting for someone to find these records. And have you ever seen someone in a reflection who wasn't really there? Share your experience in the comments. The mysterious text message left me shaken. I tried calling the number back, but an automated voice informed me it wasn't in service. I considered abandoning my research entirely, but historians' curiosity, or perhaps something else, compelled me to return the next day. Miss Palmer seemed unusually interested in my reactions. "Finding everything you need, Dr. Graham?" she asked, her gaze lingering on me. "Yes, thank you," I replied, unable to shake the feeling she knew more than she revealed. Today's documents focused on the final months of Whispering Pines. The first was a staff report from July 1921. Incident report, July 17, 1921. At approximately 3:15 a.m., night staff reported unusual sounds emanating from the East Wing, where patients R17 reside. Nurse Collins described it as a chorus of whispers, all speaking in unison, but in no language I've ever heard. Upon investigation, all 7 primary patients were found seated in a circle in the common area, though logs indicate their rooms were locked at midnight check. When questioned how they accessed the area, patient D2 stated, "We didn't move our bodies, only our minds." Dr. Merrick was notified, but instructed staff not to separate the patients, instead observing and recording their behavior. For 6 hours, they remained in the same position, occasionally speaking in perfect synchronization. Most statements were incomprehensible, but phrases about thinning barriers and imminent breakthrough were recorded. At precisely 9:17 a.m., all 7 patients simultaneously collapsed into unconsciousness. Upon revival, none recalled the incident, but all reported identical dreams of a door opening. Dr. Merrick has ordered increased dosages of the protective compounds for all staff and additional silver alloy shielding for the facility's perimeter walls. The next document was a letter from Dr. Merrick to his Board of Trustees. Dated August 1921. Distinguished colleagues, I write to address concerns about recent developments at the Institute. While some incidents may appear alarming when viewed out of context, they represent breakthrough moments in our understanding of human consciousness. The synchronized behavior of our primary subjects indicates the development of a shared perceptual field, a collective consciousness that transcends individual neural limitations. This is not, as some staff have suggested, evidence of dangerous psychosis or external influence. The Church's escalating interest is unfortunate but manageable. Their representative has been shown only what is necessary to allay suspicions of impropriety while protecting our most significant discoveries regarding the contagious nature of our subjects' perceptual states. We have implemented protocols to contain this effect within our facility. The silver alloy barriers disrupt the Blackwood frequency effectively, preventing unintended transmission beyond our walls. I must emphasize that we stand at the threshold of redefining human potential. What we have discovered is not merely a treatment methodology, but possibly an evolutionary catalyst. The final phase begins next month. I anticipate conclusive results by year's end. A. Merrick. A note was paperclipped to this letter, a handwritten message in different handwriting. Albert is losing perspective. The patients are changing in ways we didn't anticipate. Yesterday, patient number 1 accurately described the contents of my safe at home, documents I've never shown anyone. When I asked how he knew, he said, "They showed me. They want us to keep going." More concerning, staff are developing symptoms without direct exposure to the resonator. 3 nurses now report hearing whispers when alone, and Dr. Reed's assistant swears she saw patient number 3 in 2 places simultaneously. The Church's concerns may be superstitious, but they're not entirely wrong. Something is happening here that transcends scientific explanation. Dr. J. Wilson, Associate Director. Next was an urgent memo from Merrick to all staff, dated September 3rd, 1921. Urgent. Protocol revision, effective immediately. 1. No direct physical contact with primary patients. 2. All staff must wear protective pendants at all times, including off-duty hours. 3. Audio recording devices are prohibited. They can capture and transmit the Blackwood frequency. 4. Any staff experiencing unusual perceptions must report immediately for screening. The breakthrough is closer than anticipated. The barrier between observer and observed is thinning. We must maintain controlled conditions to prevent premature perceptual contagion. I felt that now familiar pressure in my ears as I read the subtle whispers returning at the edge of hearing. Was I experiencing the same perceptual contagion described in these documents? The rational part of my mind insisted these were simply psychosomatic responses to suggestive material. Yet I couldn't explain the text message or the reflection I'd seen. The next document was the most disturbing yet, a transcript of what appeared to be Merrick's personal audio journal, dated October 1921. The subjects have begun referring to themselves as a collective. They no longer use I, but we. Most remarkable is their claim that this we includes entities that exist beyond our normal perceptual range, beings they insist have always been present but undetected by conventional consciousness. Are they experiencing genuine contact with non-human intelligences, or is this a shared delusion facilitated by the resonator? The evidence increasingly supports the former, though I hesitate to record such a conclusion officially. Patient number 1 described the nature of these entities today. They exist in the frequencies between solid matter. They perceive time differently, all moments simultaneously rather than sequentially. They've been trying to communicate with humans throughout history, but our consciousness operates on the wrong frequency to perceive them. When I asked their purpose in contacting us, all 7 patients replied in perfect unison, "Evolution requires a catalyst. I've begun experiencing perceptual anomalies myself. Yesterday, I distinctly heard my name whispered, though no one was present. This morning, I saw movement in reflective surfaces that didn't correspond to anything in the room. The church representatives return tomorrow. I've prepared a sanitized demonstration, but their suspicions grow. We may need to accelerate our timeline." The final document in today's section was a letter from the Cardinal's office to Bishop Reynolds, dated November 1st, 1921. After reviewing Father Reed's reports regarding Whispering Pines Institute, I authorize immediate ecclesiastical intervention. This facility's activities constitute a clear spiritual danger. Dr. Merrick's claims of expanded consciousness through mechanical means represent a modern form of Gnosticism, seeking transcendent knowledge through unauthorized channels rather than through divine revelation and church teaching. Most alarming is the apparent transferability of these altered states. If such capabilities spread beyond the Institute's walls, the theological and social implications would be profound. You are authorized to employ all necessary measures to ensure the immediate cessation of these experiments and the secure containment of all related documents and equipment. This matter is now under direct Vatican jurisdiction. Invoke specialized protocols if required. As I finished reading, the archive room's lights flickered. The whispers, which had been a distant murmur, suddenly intensified, dozens of overlapping voices speaking words I couldn't quite distinguish. In the darkened computer monitor on Ms. Palmer's empty desk, I saw a reflection that wasn't mine. 7 faces staring back at me, their eyes blank white orbs, their lips moving in perfect synchronization. I blinked, and the image vanished. But the whispers remained, now forming words I could understand. The door is still open. The frequency still resonates. We've been waiting for a new catalyst. My phone vibrated in my pocket. The screen showed a text from the same unknown number. Check the basement archives. Box 37B. The church didn't find everything. The resonator still exists. I looked up to find Ms. Palmer watching me from the doorway. "Are you all right, Dr. Graham?" she asked. "Doug, you look like you've seen a ghost." "Just deep in research," I managed. "There's a basement level you might find interesting," she said, her expression unreadable. "Older materials. I could show you tomorrow." "Box 37B?" I asked, before I could stop myself. A slight smile formed on her lips. "You've heard of it." "How curious." "Yes, that's one of the restricted collections. Special access only." She tilted her head slightly. "But for a serious researcher like yourself, exceptions can be made. As she turned to leave, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. A small silver pendant around her neck, shaped like a pine tree. And you? Have you ever received a message from an unknown sender that seemed to know too much about you? Tell us in the comments below. That night, sleep eluded me. The whispers had followed me from the archive, faint but persistent. In my hotel bathroom, I avoided looking directly at the mirror, glimpsing only fragments of my reflection in the periphery of my vision, afraid of what else might appear. By morning, I'd made two decisions. I would see what was in box 37B, and afterward, I would end this research and return home. Professional curiosity had given way to genuine apprehension. Ms. Palmer was waiting when I arrived. "Ready for the basement archives?" she asked, jingling a ring of old keys. Her silver pine tree pendant caught the light as she moved. "Before we go," I said, "may I ask about your necklace? It resembles the Whispering Pines insignia." She touched it reflexively. "Family heirloom. My grandmother worked as a nurse at St. Mary's Hospital in the 1920s. She studied me carefully. The records are affecting you, aren't they? The whispers have started." The directness of her question left me speechless. "It's all right," she continued. "It happens to everyone who studies these documents extensively." The Blackwood frequency was somehow embedded in the ink itself, another of Merrick's innovations. The church never understood that part. "You know about the frequency." "My grandmother was Nurse Matthews, the first staff member to experience perceptual transference. She kept detailed journals." Mrs. Palmer unlocked a door marked "Restricted Archives." The church thought they contained everything, but some records were hidden, passed down through families connected to the Institute. The basement was cool and dimly lit, filled with metal shelving units containing hundreds of acid-free boxes. She led me to a far corner where a single box sat isolated on its own shelf. Unlike the others, box 37B was made of wood lined with tarnished silver. "Merrick designed these containers to contain the frequency," she explained, unlocking it with a small silver key. "They're only partially effective. The resonance still leaks through, but slowly, like radiation." Inside was a leather-bound journal, a small wooden box, and several photographs. Ms. Palmer handled them with cloth gloves, spreading them on a nearby table. "These are Dr. Merrick's personal records of the final days of Whispering Pines," she explained. "The church never found them." The first photograph showed Merrick with 7 patients seated in a circle. Their eyes were uniformly white, reflecting the camera flash like a cat's eyes in darkness. Behind them stood hospital staff wearing identical silver pendants. The second image was more disturbing. The same 7 patients, now standing with arms outstretched, surrounded by what appeared to be faint, luminous outlines, humanoid shapes that the camera had barely captured. "Perceptual entities," Ms. Palmer explained, "normally invisible, but the resonator made them briefly photographable. Merrick called them frequency beings, intelligences existing just beyond our normal perceptual range." I opened the journal with trembling fingers. The first entry was dated December 2nd, 1921. "The church's intervention is imminent. Bishop Reynolds has demanded we cease operations, threatening ecclesiastical action if we refuse. I've relocated the primary resonator to the secondary facility, but there's no need for the device anymore. The process has become self-sustaining within the primary subjects. Most remarkable is that our subjects now function as human resonators themselves, capable of attuning others without mechanical assistance. The frequency beings communicate through them directly, describing a future where human perception evolves beyond current limitations. The entities insist they have influenced human evolution throughout history, creating periodic perceptual leaps in selected individuals. What we've achieved is merely an acceleration of this natural process, opening doors that would eventually open anyway. The final entry, dated December 15th, 1921, was written in shaky handwriting. Church officials arrive tomorrow. I've dispersed the primary subjects to safe locations. The research will continue through them, spreading gradually rather than from a centralized location. The frequency cannot be contained now. It resonates in their minds, in these pages, in the very walls of this building. To whoever finds these records in the future, if you can read these words, you are already changing. The whispers you hear are real. The shadows you see in reflections are real. You have begun to perceive what has always been present but filtered out by conventional consciousness. This is not madness, it is evolution. As I read the final words, the whispers around me synchronized into a single voice, still quiet but perfectly clear. "We've been waiting for you, Dr. Graham." I looked up sharply. "You hear them too?" I asked, "Ms. Palmer." She nodded. "Everyone connected to the original subjects does. My grandmother was one of the first affected. It passes through bloodlines, growing stronger in each generation." She opened the small wooden box, revealing what looked like a miniature version of the apparatus in Merrick's photograph. A silver and copper device the size of a pocket watch. "A portable resonator," she explained. "One of 3 Merrick created before the end. It can't initiate the process, but it can amplify and stabilize perceptual shifts already underway." "Why are you showing me this?" "Because you're already transitioning. Your research, your contact with the documents. You've been exposed to the frequency. But without stabilization, the perceptual shifts can become overwhelming." She touched her pendant. "These provide partial protection, but only the resonator offers control." The whispers intensified, and with them came fleeting visions. Transparent figures moving at the corners of my vision, gone when I turned to look directly. "What happened to the original patients?" I asked. "They lived remarkably long lives, though they eventually left conventional society, too difficult to interact with people who couldn't perceive what they could." She hesitated. "The last one passed in 1997 at age 103, but their legacy continues through those they influenced, including my family." She handed me the portable resonator. "This belongs with someone who understands its significance from both historical and experiential perspectives." As my fingers closed around it, a surge of clarity washed over me. The whispers organized themselves into coherent communication. The shadowy figures at the periphery of my vision gained definition, humanoid but somehow more fluid, their forms shifting like smoke in patterns that suggested intelligence. "There are others like us," Ms. Palmer said. "People who've discovered the frequency through various means, the original documents, contact with descendants of patients, even certain meditation practices that accidentally achieve the right brainwave state. We find each other, eventually. And the church, still watching, still containing what they can. They have a special division that tracks unusual perceptual phenomena, but they never understood that the frequency, once released, couldn't be recaptured, only managed." As we returned the materials to Box 37B, I noticed my reflection in a glass cabinet door. For an instant, my eyes appeared completely white, like those of Merrick's patients in the photographs. "It will stabilize," Miss Palmer assured me, noticing my alarm. "The initial transition is the most disorienting. The resonator helps regulate the perceptual shifts until you learn to control them yourself." Outside the library, standing on the steps in the bright afternoon sunlight, the world looked simultaneously familiar and utterly transformed. Transparent figures moved among the crowds, observing, sometimes interacting with unwitting humans who shivered or glanced around when the entities passed through them. "What do they want?" I asked quietly. To be perceived, she replied. They've always been here, existing alongside us, but in frequencies we couldn't naturally detect. Merrick didn't create a connection to another world. He simply helped us tune into channels that were always broadcasting. I closed my hand around the small resonator in my pocket, its subtle vibration matching the rhythm of the whispers that now seemed as natural as the sound of traffic or wind. Your research will change, Ms. Palmer said as we parted. Once you perceive the frequency, you can't study history the same way again. You'll see patterns others miss, influences others can't detect. Is that a warning or a promise? I asked. She smiled. Both. Welcome to the wider spectrum, Dr. Graham. As I walked away, my phone chimed with a final text from the unknown number. The door remains open. What will you do with what you now perceive? I didn't need to respond. They already knew my answer. If you want to hear more whispers from the darkness, follow this channel. The next story might be closer than you think.